Salve, guys. In this video, we're going to take a look at the next type of participle called the perfect passive participle. So you should add these to your notes, and then there'll be a little exercise on the bottom for you to submit. All right, so this is chapter 23, and in chapter 23, participles are introduced. There are 4 types of participles. We've already learned the present active participle. So as a recap, this particular type of word translates as ing. It's featured by an ns ending in the nominative singular or an nt followed by third declension adjective endings. These endings are attached to the first principal part, stem. Typo. So an example of what a present participle looks like: prementes milites. Primo is a verb in this chapter, and it's the verb to attack or press. You see the nt and then a third declension adjective ending. Milites is the noun for soldiers, so this translates as the attacking soldiers. All right, participles are the adjective form of a verb. So you take a verb and you make an adjective out of it, which is possible in any language. All right, so the perfect passive participle is probably the most common, and it's really easy to form. So let's talk about how it translates first, and then we'll take a look at what it looks like in Latin. All right, so it translates as having been. Okay, so it's something that happened in the past, and it's passive, so it happens to the noun that it describes. There's another way to translate it, but we'll take a look at that in a second. All right, what it is it is the fourth principal part of the verb. So you don't have to worry about creating it like you do with the present participle. It's already been created for you. It is the fourth principal part of any verb. So we typically list our fourth principal parts with a um ending, like amatum would be the fourth principal part of the verb to love. But really, that looks like this. All right, so we can expand it to look like this type of adjective, which you know as a 2-1-2 adjective. All right, so while a present participle is a third declension adjective, a perfect participle is a 2-1-2 or first, second declension adjective. So in this video, we're not going to look at the charts for it. It's simply all the endings from the first and second declension. So every perfect participle gets this us, and those represent, the US represents the second declension masculine, the A represents the first declension feminine, and the represents the second declension neuter. Okay, because remember, adjectives have to agree with any gender of noun. So let's take a look at some examples. All right, so amata puella. All right, so puella, we know, the noun for girl, and amata is describing it because the A ending matches up with the gender, the feminine gender of the noun. So this would translate as the girl having been loved. You might think that's a little too wordy. So another way of saying that would be the loved girl. All right, a way you can use that in a sentence, you could also say something like maybe the girl loved by her mother was happy, or something like that. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. Let's use some vocab from this chapter. All right. Milites would be soldiers, like we just used before. And let's take this fourth principal part, oppressi. All right, let me just go over to the vocab to show you. All right, this is our most recent vocab list, and the fourth principal part of the verb to overwhelm has these double S's and then the UM. So going over to here. All right, so second declension. Since soldier is a masculine noun, I'm going to use the second declension and the nominative plural here. All right, so both words, milites and oppressi, they agree with each other. They're both nominative plural in this example. And so this would translate as the soldiers having been overwhelmed. Or the overwhelmed soldiers. So the overwhelmed soldiers retreated, or whatever. Now, this is a tough verb form to catch because you don't have an indicator like this NT you see in a present participle. All right, so it's just whatever the fourth principal part of the verb is. That's why you study principal parts when you learn Latin. So having been, or you can do this kind of ED translation. All right, it is the fourth principal part of the verb. It gets first and second declension adjective endings. So we don't need to go over charts because it's just those declensions, nothing fancy, attached to the end of the fourth principal part. All right, so you guys are going to do this little activity. Not too many questions here, but a little tricky. All right, so this is all vocab from this chapter, so you're definitely going to want to use that vocab list. I'll just do number 1 for you so you can kind of see how this works. All right, so I'm looking at arx and oppressa. So arx is the noun, and that's the Latin noun for citadel. And so we're going to say what case it is, and then the translation. All right, and then number, of course, means singular or plural. So arx, this first one's pretty easy. Arx is clearly the subject, the nominative. All right, so you might need your first and second declension noun endings to do this activity. So it's nominative and singular, and then we're going to translate it based on the case. So the fortress, and so since it's nominative, we don't have to do anything like of or to or for. The fortress having been overwhelmed. You can give either translation here. So the fortress having been overwhelmed, or the overwhelmed fortress would also work. All right, so the rest of these are in different cases. It's your job to figure out which case they are. They all agree with each other, so they all have the same case. And then translate accordingly. So if it's genitive, you'll do of, dative to or for, ablative by, with, or from, and so on. All right. That should clear up the perfect participle. Well, obviously, these are the two most common, the present and the perfect. And then the other two types of participles are a little bit more obscure. But we'll cover them over the next couple weeks. All right. Thanks for tuning in. And I will say walite. Come on.